Hi folks, I'm making this video in the last week of July 2020, and as it's becoming increasingly obvious that many of us are going to continue teaching or learning online for the fall, quite a few friends and acquaintances have asked me, what laptop should I be buying to make teaching online easier? I'll be honest, I started to make a series about suggestions for teaching online back when COVID-19 first hit around February or March. But I've set it aside and I said, everybody knows this stuff. I don't need to explain it. Well, apparently there's some subtleties, if you will, about teaching online that aren't immediately evident. And so I'm going to talk about various factors that lead into what type of laptop you should buy. The first thing, before we get started though, is to point out when you're talking about being the teacher online, you switch over from being a consumer of video content across the internet to a producer of video content across the internet. And as we'll talk about, for several reasons, that means you need a little bit better laptop. There's lots of good laptops out there right now. If you just wanted something that you could watch YouTube on, run Word, do some web browsing, stuff like that. There's lots of good laptops out there that you can get for the $350 to $450 price range. You can spend more, but you can get a decent laptop for that price range. However, once you put yourself in the position of needing to create video content, and particularly maybe complicated video content, which we'll talk about in just a minute, you need a faster processor, you need more RAM, you need more cores in your processor. So it is a little bit more complicated than I guess one would think about at first glance. Now, you'll notice that my video today will actually violate some of the rules that we'll talk about in just a minute in terms of how to make a good video, because I'm making something basically on a particular point. I'm going to beat around the bush a little bit before we get there, though. First of all, I want to talk about what my rules for successfully engaging students with video are. Then we'll talk about the idea of what type of material are you going to be using in your video and what type of video will it be. We'll talk about how the logistics is going to be handled. Who will be responsible for rendering, as it's called, or converting the video into a format that can be played or viewed by your students. When is it going to be pushed out? Is it going to be synchronous versus asynchronous? And how are the students going to watch it? Are they going to watch it on their cell phones? Are they going to watch it on their computers? Now, the reason we're going to talk about these things is all of these things wind up mattering in terms of what type of laptop you need to think about getting. I will make some specific laptop recommendations at the end, and I will post links to any material that I show on a website at the end of this video. First of all, let's talk about my rules for successfully engaging with video. Now, first of all, realize that I'm assuming that you stumbled upon this video because you're interested in making videos and using them to teach. There's lots of people out there that are very successful at putting documents up for students to use, or responding to email, or basically teaching in a non-video manner. But I'm assuming that you're interested in this because you're thinking about doing something online that involves videoing yourself, your screen, or some combination thereof. Now, I've got three basic rules for using videos. First of all, try to keep it as interesting as possible. Mix up the format, right? Don't make it all you talking, always looking at slides, stuff like that. Switch back and forth between content. You're going to see that in just a second. I'll be switching back and forth between my slide set and my web browser to illustrate some examples. But mix it up even more than that. Secondly, and you've heard people say this again and again, but it's really true, try to keep your video somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. If you have a topic that's longer than that, think about what natural breakpoints exist within that topic and chop it up into 5 to 10 minutes. You're going to lose your audience. And this isn't just Gen X, Gen Y, that kind of stuff. This is, all of us that have watched videos are used to a particular length of video that we're comfortable with. And that's affected by YouTube, but it's also affected by what we see on TV and so forth when they do switch scenes and so forth. You need to do the same thing as the, quote, producer of your own material. Make a plan that involves no more than 5 to 10 minute videos. No matter how many videos you got to chop it up into. Maybe have the students go do something else, read a chapter or read a section of the textbook, come back and watch another video, or watch a hands-on video where you're illustrating how to do something, and then come back and watch a sort of more theoretical based video. And then finally, always be thinking ahead in terms of what device and in what format the students are going to be watching these videos. In my experience, when instructors sit down in front of a computer and make the video, they assume that somebody's watching it in front of a computer. That's not always the case. And I've learned to be particularly mindful of that because I actually use I forget what it is, 42-inch 4K TV at home. It was cheap, take my word for it. But I use that as my monitor. And so things that look perfectly fine to me on a 42-inch monitor are not going to look fine to somebody on a MacBook Air with an 11-inch screen on it or something like that, or heaven forbid, watching it on their smartphone. So think ahead in terms of, how your students are going to be using this, how much material can you put on a screen, what font should you use, and so forth. Now, the first rule of picking out a laptop is going to be to understand that even though laptops come with microphones and in most cases webcams and speakers, none of the types of those things that they come with are actually intended for sort of good use. They're meant to be convenience factors, right? You take the laptop with you. Worst case comes to worst, you can talk to somebody through the microphone that's built in. You can listen through the speakers, even though they stink. And, there's a webcam, but in many cases, it's not a good webcam. And again, with an eye towards you're now producing the video rather than just being sort of an ad hoc participant in meetings with peers and colleagues, it's up to you to make it a little bit more professional. So realize that whether you go out and get a laptop or whether you get a desktop, there's a certain set of tools that you're going to want to use above and beyond, whenever you can, what's available built into your laptop. Now, speakers, that's up to you, right? Your speakers don't need to be that great for your students and people that you're conversing with on the web to get the feel that you're professional. It'll help, it'll help you, and you'll see that some of the things we're going to talk about in just a second come with speakers like headsets and so forth. But speakers aren't the important thing. The important thing is your webcam and your microphone. Now, fixing the webcam is actually the easiest part. Fixing your webcam basically boils down to getting this webcam right here. Most webcams built into laptops are what are called 720p. That is, they're going to show a resolution of about 1280 times 720. And if you are solely doing Zoom and you're not showing fine details of how to do stuff on screen, 720p, as it's called, is fine. But if you're pre-recording video, or even if you're zooming but you're showing stuff that needs higher definition, you need a what's called 1080p camera. The best, hands down, 1080p camera out there is this C920 camera by Logitech. It's gone through several versions, several evolutions, but there's several aspects of this that make it ideal. First of all, you'll notice by inference here, it has two microphones built in. So if you want to use this thing for your microphone, it's going to be better than the microphone built into your laptop to start with. I don't like to use this, to be honest. Some of the other microphones I'm going to show you in just a second are a lot better and a lot closer to my mouth, if you will, than this webcam. Another nice thing about this webcam is it sort of automatically is set up so that if you're zooming, it'll use 720p. But if you're recording, it records at a higher resolution, 1080p, 1920 times 1080 pixels. Now again, you might not want to have too fine a detail depending upon what your students are watching, but it's handy to have that resolution in a webcam. To be honest though, the thing that I like the most about this webcam is the fact that yes, you can clip it to the top of a notebook, and here you see it basically covering over the built-in webcam in what looks like a MacBook or something like that. But more importantly, it's got this sort of flexible stand, and even though they don't show it in the pictures here, on the very bottom of that flexible stand, so the bottom of the part 3 that they're identifying there, there's a little hole to screw in a tripod mount. Right? So you can basically just screw this to a regular tripod, or you can attach it to things like this. So this is a tripod mount that you can mount on your wall. I've got cheap paneling in our basement where I keep my office, so I just screwed this right under my monitor. And the nice thing is that it sort of lifts my camera up so that when I'm looking at my monitor, I'm also looking at the webcam, and it makes it a lot easier to sort of talk to the people and look at them while you're talking to them. There's several other types of mounts that you can use with that. There's a gooseneck mount, right? Again, it has a little screw built into the bottom here that screws right up into that little flat part. And then let's see, what was my third thing here? Oh, that's when we get to microphones. So I would recommend getting this. It's somewhat expensive. It's somewhat hard to find. It's sold out a lot. The reason it's sold out is because it's one of the best ones. There are alternatives. There are other Logitech webcams that to be honest, they probably don't have as good a resolution. They certainly don't have the 2 built-in microphones that do as well. There's other vendors that make, around the $50, $60 price range alternatives to this. But the other thing is that when you use this webcam, it also comes with Logitech software that allows you to do things like choose the source, choose the resolution. Basically, you can refine what you're passing either over the web or to your screen capture software. So hands down, this is the best webcam to get. Now, in terms of speakers, like I said, you could use the speakers built into this, or when I first got started, I actually used Skullcandy headphones, earbuds that have an inline mic for a cell phone. This right here is better than the microphone that's built into your laptop. It's closer to you, which means it picks up more sound. It's a little bit tinny. It's basically just a piece of electronics. It doesn't have the whole vibrating setup that good microphones we'll talk about in just a second have. But it's pretty darn cheap. And, if you've got an older cell phone that still has a headphone jack, you've probably got some of these lying around someplace. Now, if you want to up your game a little bit, the next step up, and probably the more convenient thing, because a lot of you, when you're teaching, you won't be in an empty room. There might be other people around you making noise. The headphones and a headset will help you seclude yourself from that noise. But the fact that the way the mic works, because it's close to your mouth, it doesn't have to be as powerful, it won't pick up sounds off to the side as much as it will your voice. So it'll help you sort of work in a congested environment, if you will. Now, we've used this Impal headset before. I got it for my wife and kids when they started making videos. It's okay. It's decent. You'll notice that it comes with a USB cord. That's because basically there's a little sound processor, if you will, built into this volume control doohickey. It's okay, but in my experience, it's good for telemarketers and stuff like that, but it's not something you as a student would want to listen to for a while. Comes across really tinny. This thing also breaks a lot. It's just sort of fragile, and it doesn't give you that good a voice. Now, for most of us, if you just want something simple but a little bit more durable than this, you're going to go with a gaming headset. And yes, the gaming headsets just look like this, but sort of on steroids. So here's one I've gotten. It's a Razer gaming headset, and yeah, you're talking some decent money. But the nice thing about this, the speakers and the headphones are much better. Now this mic here actually sort of retracts in. It just sticks out as a nub when you're not using it. It's a decent mic. Again, it has an inline, sorry, didn't mean to click on that, has an inline controller that does some processing before it passes it to your computer as a USB signal. So it's still going to sound a little bit tinnier than something that has a condenser mic, as it's called, and we'll see those in just a second. But it's decent. Probably the best headset mic that is not a condenser mic is the one that we wound up getting for my wife to use in her videos. This HyperX, it's still a gaming headset. But it does a really good job of processing. The mic seems to be decent. Again, it's not going to have deep, rich, mellow sounds in it because it's not that kind of mic, but it has accurate reproduction of sound. So this right here would be perfect. If you look around, sometimes you can find it on sale. I think I found it back around Thanksgiving. I want to say 65 bucks. Sometimes it'll go on sale. Now, the other thing too is that if you do have a little room, or you can shoo everybody else out of the room when you're teaching, maybe you don't need a headset. Maybe you don't like wearing a headset. Maybe you find it, to be a bother. There's other types of mics that also hook into USB that are meant to be placed in front of you. They capture sound a little bit further away, and they do get closer to this idea of a condenser mic, right? Now, one of the most popular ones, it's a little bit older, but it's called the Blue Snowball. It has a little switch on the back. I don't know if they show it here or not, but you can switch it between sort of three patterns. That is, use what's called the cardioid feature if you want it to capture just you in front of it, and then there's a surround sound feature, and then a couple of other ways you can set this. It's a good mic. It's, to be honest, it's probably better because it's bigger, so it's got sort of it's got enough space for the type of mic that actually vibrates when sound hits it, if you will, which is what a condenser capsule is. So you're going to get better sound from this than you will from any of those other headset mics. This is going a little bit out of style. It works on both Macs and PCs. You can usually get it for around this $50 price point, and they've got white ones, they've got silver ones, they've got black ones. You can also get boom arms to mount them on. I've got one of those, and it works fine. If you want to get the best sort of USB plug-in mic, and this is probably outside of the price range that most of us would consider. This thing sells for around $200. Sometimes you can get it on sale for like $160 or $170. Again, it's by the company Blue, but it's the Yeti mic, and it's just much better built for capturing sound. It's much closer in dimensions, shape, and capabilities to the types of microphones that you see in studio recording situations, right? When you see a video being made and insert singer of choice here is back behind the transparent plexiglass singing their heart away. They usually sing it into something that's shaped like this that has similar mechanics to this. To be honest, they're probably much more expensive than this and much better made, but this is a pretty decent mic. Now again, it's still a USB mic. Now, you can spend $200 for this and you'll be really happy with it. That might be too much for you. There is an alternative, and the alternative is to actually go with sort of more, I hesitate to call it professional level equipment, but more typical or conventional audio equipment. Now, they don't have the company that I bought it from, and you've got to be careful because there's a lot of mics that look similar to this. It was I think a Fleurion was the name brand, and I think there's one or two companies in China, to be honest, that make these things, and then lots of companies slap their names on them. But it looks a lot like that Blue Yeti mic. Sometimes you can get a decent bundle, right, that comes with a boom arm that you can mount to your desk. It comes with a little screen to keep you from sort of breathing too heavily. It comes with a suspended mount and so forth. Now, the other thing to realize, and what you're looking for though, is the BM-800, right? Don't be fooled by, this is not a BM-800. And the way you can tell is that at the bottom of the mic itself, it's got a fat connector. And that fat connector is what's called an XLR connector. And I'll show you an example of it in just a second. As a matter of fact, don't know if you hear it or not, but my dog's barking right now. So one of the reasons I use the headset is hopefully that will dampen that out a little bit for you guys. So let's look at, let's look at this one. I just want to see if it shows the bottom of the mic. Well, it doesn't show the bottom of the mic, but it does show a little bit better the type of connector that goes in there. It's got like three thick connectors. It's an audio cord. Now, what does that mean, and why is that important? Well, it's important because, to be honest, you're not going to get the best sound from something that plugs into a USB connection. You're going to get the best sound from something that plugs into a sound mixer and then converts it to a digital signal, which it sends to your computer. You could get this kit, and you'd actually want to, I think, trade or get a different cord. You'd want XLR on both ends. This is XLR to mini DIN for plugging straight into your laptop or something. But if you got this and then bought a $6 or $7 cord that had XLR on both ends, you could then plug it into something like this, right? And these are two XLR connectors here for different inputs. Basically, you can set the gain, you can set the treble, tenor, all that stuff. I usually leave mine set at the same location. This is really handy if you have people that are talking with you when you're making a video. You can give them one mic, you can take another mic, and you can literally mix the sounds together. A lot of the other connectors here are for connecting instruments, right? So again, this is more professional audio setup. Now, this is not professional pricing though. $40 for this, and let's say $40 for this, maybe throw in another $10. For $90, you could get a very decent sounding setup. Matter of fact, what I'm going to do, right now I'm on another headset, which I'll show you guys in just a second. I'm going to switch over. I'm going to dampen this, and then I'm going to take my version of the BM800 and come across on that. Testing, testing, testing. So this is me on my version of the BM800 mic. It's on a boom, very similar to the one that we saw in the previous web page. I'm going to switch back to my headset mic. So, I have that BM800 as one input to a mixing box very similar to this, and then on my headset as another input, so I can switch back and forth very easily. I don't intend for you guys to switch, but the point I was making, for about $90 you can get something that sounds fairly professional. Now, if you really want, and this is what I'm talking to you on now, this is an XLR headset. It has a cardioid condenser mic in this little arm here. It uses a XLR connection on the end. You said, well, there's two there. There's a like a big DIN, right, and a XLR. Well, the big DIN is for the headphone part, right, to come back to you, and the XLR part is for the microphone to go in. This is probably the best mic that I've ever used, and this is what I use to make most of my videos. Not when I'm talking to the screen and videotaping myself, but when I am like this, I'm talking over a screen capture. I like this, but again, it's $200, so it would be $200 plus, you know, $40, $50 for the sound capture. Is it worth it? It depends. I make videos regularly for textbooks I write, for classes I teach. I wind up using this thing several times a week. So for me, it's worth it. For you, it's probably not. And I'll be honest, for most of you, I think you'd be perfectly happy with a gaming headset, or if you don't want a headset, this blue snowball mic. Sorry, that was a little bit more than I meant to talk, but let's switch back over to the slides and continue. We're getting there, I promise. Now, one of the things that you're also going to have to consider when deciding what laptop you want to get is what type of videos are you going to be making. Are you going to be videoing you talking as sort of a talking head video? Then it's all about the webcam, if you will. Or are you going to do more complicated things? Maybe you want to not just show yourself talking, but you know, sometimes I'll do teardown videos or unboxing videos for laptops. I need to turn the camera that I'm using to focus on the object that I'm dealing with and my hands, and you know, how I'm opening it up, what kind of attributes it's got, and so forth. Are you going to be recording your computer screen, which is what I'm doing right now? There's also drawing screens. Now, a lot of you don't like teaching on the computer because you say, well, okay, Troy, you teach data science and programming. And so you're teaching coding, you're teaching Excel, you're teaching stuff like that. It makes sense to record the computer. How does that make sense for me? Well, if you use a whiteboard or a chalkboard, you can get this at a very reasonable price, and they actually have different levels. This is the big, the 15.6-inch version of it, but if you look, they'll tell you that they've got a 11.6-inch version, a 13.3-inch version, which are cheaper and everything. But the whole point is that this is a computer screen that you can draw on. And as they point out, you've got 8,192 different levels of pressure. You can choose colors. There's buttons to quick select different key combinations, different colors and different sort of virtual brush types, if you will. The nice thing is that these tablets by XP Pen and different tablets that are very similar to it all work very well with Microsoft OneNote or with several different free whiteboard programs out there. They put virtual little colored markers up there. You click on the colored marker you want with your pen, and then you start writing, and it writes in that color. You click on an eraser, and you can erase with that, right? So it's pretty cool to use. So even if you're not going to be teaching a computer program or speaking to a slide set, if you're showing somebody how to draw or you're showing somebody how to do math, this is handy as a whiteboard. Now, let's see. If you get this thing, by the way, it's really handy, except you really should get a stand with it. So I'll put a link to the stand too. It's fairly simple. It just holds it up at a whatever angle you like. I like 45 degrees, but that's easier than holding it in your lap. I'm not a sit on the couch and hold it in my lap type of guy, which I think is what they show and that person doing. I don't like bending like that. If you're like me, and notice they've got the same stand right here too. The stand's cheap. Right? It's like relatively cheap. You can also buy knockoff brands that are much cheaper than that. Now, the other thing to think about is, what if you are doing some sort of video intensive stuff? So maybe you're doing voiceover over a video or a movie, or maybe you're actually using a computer game or a simulation and you're talking over it while you do that. Well, the point is, maybe you're not just doing one of these things. Maybe at different times you're doing multiple things, or maybe at the same time you're doing two things, right? What if you're doing picture-in-picture of you talking inset into the corner of another video stream that shows the slides that you're talking about or the material that you're discussing? The point is, as you go down this list, one of the reasons we sort of have to think about this is, once you get above doing anything other than just you talking to a webcam, your computer has to handle several things. They not only have to take what you're doing and turn it into a rendered format, either to send it out immediately as a web stream or to save it in a format so it can be rendered as a movie file later. But once you start doing more stuff with your computer at the same time, your computer then has to do the capture and has to support you playing the video, you playing the game, you drawing on the whiteboard. So because of that, the strength of computer you need is going to be prefaced by, what are you going to do with it? Doing simple stuff? Maybe you could get by with a $500 computer with, a standalone webcam, and you'd be fine with it. But if you're going to do anything on the computer to be more dynamic, more interactive, you're going to be drawing, you're going to be playing, you're going to be showing people what to do in RStudio or in, name your development editor of choice, you're going to be taxing your computer a little bit more. Now, the other thing, last thing we need to think about before I'll actually go ahead and give you some recommendations, is who or how is that video going to be rendered? Now, when you make a Zoom call or when you use some other type of web chat functionality, your camera and your computer together are converting the video stream into a particular format that can be sent over the internet and then decoded and played as video on the person that you're corresponding with's computer. It is doing some rendering. In addition, and I'll use Zoom as an example, Zoom actually renders your video a couple of different ways if you ask it to. It'll send it out immediately right then as a real-time web conference. But you can also check a box that says, hey, I want you to automatically record all of my meetings. And what it does is it records that in a different format, and then it sends it to a render machine afterwards, which converts it into a MP4 or AVI, whatever type of movie file you need for your host, your website that you're going to put the videos on. So who's going to do the rendering? If it's going to be the Zoom app, and it's going to be, you're going to let Zoom render it up on the cloud, and you don't have to render on your computer, then you can probably get by with a, let's say, a lighter brand of more powerful computer. On the other hand, if you're going to be doing the rendering, and I like to, when I teach on Zoom, for example, I'll let Zoom capture it, then I download what they capture, and I actually produce the video myself, because I can choose different settings, I can cut back and forth between the Zoom meeting, and I can do stuff with it. So if you're going to be rendering it yourself on your computer, then you'll need something more powerful. How does it get consumed? Synchronously or asynchronously? Well, synchronously, that's one type of editing. And most machines are set up to handle editing synchronously through what's called the CPU, or computer processor unit. So you need more thinking power, if you will, if you're doing sync video. If you're going to produce the video, post it someplace for people to watch it asynchronously, though, it actually makes sense to have a graphics processing unit, which is designed for speeding up the processing. Long story short, synchronous video tends to be lower resolution and, I won't say more shoddily put together, but computationally less intensive to create. Asynchronous video, the programs you use, the sites that you post it to, and so forth, assume that you're going to take more time and effort. You're going to do a better job with asynchronous. So it needs sort of a helper, and that helper is what's called a GPU. So synchronous video, I'd lean towards a better CPU. Asynchronous video, I'd lean towards an okay CPU, but a better GPU. Now, and as we've already discussed, how the student's going to be watching it. Are they going to be on a computer? Then 1080p. Are they going to be on their phone or on a tablet, or maybe watching it on the TV or something like that? Then you don't need as high a resolution, which means you don't need as much processing, which means you don't need to do as much rendering. So, to summarize, the reason all this matters is that if you're going to be doing mostly streaming video, then you want a laptop that has really good CPU. It might not even have a separate standalone GPU. It uses what's called an integrated graphics processing unit. So basically it is part of the CPU, if you will. However, if you're going to do more than one thing at a time online, or you want to make asynchronous videos, then it's nice to still have a good CPU. But the CPU is not the most important thing. The most important thing is going to be, do you have a dedicated graphics processing unit? So sort of something that stands by itself and is designed for handling making video. And you probably also want a little bit more memory, just because rendering video streams into videos is fairly memory intensive. So my recommendations right now is a really good time to be looking for a laptop in particular to do video teaching. And the reason is, over the past few months, there's two primary producers of the CPUs that go into laptops. There's Intel, who's been around forever, and AMD, who's also been around forever, but AMD really upped their game in the past few years, and they've made this new series of CPUs called Ryzen. Because of that, if you want, particularly if you're going to focus more on streaming video rather than pre-recorded and so forth, you cannot beat the Ryzen CPUs that are out there right now. The newest Ryzen laptop CPUs have 6 or 8 cores, where Intel historically, up until AMD sort of kicked them in the seat, you got a i5, you got maybe 2 cores, 4 threads, or 4 cores. If you got an i7, they might bump you up to maybe 4 cores and 8 threads. So the Ryzen 5, right, which is meant to go up against the Intel i5, has more cores than last year's Intel i7 does. If you need to just stream, you can't beat buying a Ryzen processor. Let me show you what I mean by example. Let's talk about a couple of particular laptop recommendations. Now, again, if you're mostly going to stream, I would recommend focusing on, and make sure you look for 4th generation. That is, the processor number will start with a 4. These are called APUs. And APU is meant to stand for, it's a combination of a CPU with a GPU sort of built in. It's not discrete, it's not separate in the sense that they share memory, which is one thing we'll talk about in a second, but it's a lot more sort of powerful than the typical built-in Intel integrated GPU would be. Okay, right now, as far as I'm concerned, the hands-down best deal for getting a fast Ryzen processor that has a good number of cores is the Lenovo Flex 5 that you can buy at Costco. The reason I say Costco is that you'll see this Flex 5 offered quite a few places. There's a version on Amazon, there's a version on Walmart. However, because it is the AMD Ryzen processor, the CPU and the GPU share memory. And Lenovo has taken to soldering on their memory recently, so I would highly recommend getting 16 gig. And this is the only version of the Flex 5 that I've seen sold with 16 gig. Even if you don't have a Costco membership, at this price, getting an i7 processor, the Ryzen's version of an i7 processor, it's worth it. I'd go ahead and actually sign up for a membership and order this computer. Now, it has 8 CPU cores, which is basically the thinking part of the computer, and then that Radeon Vega GPU, which is a separate chip, but which shares the system memory. Now, second choice for somebody that's going to be streaming, if you don't want to spend quite that much money, I'd recommend looking. Walmart has an Acer Swift 3, and you can find this elsewhere too, for $579. Now, it's not the Ryzen 4700U, it's the Ryzen 5 4500U. So instead of having 8 cores, it's only got 6 cores. It only has 8 gig of RAM, and that should be enough, but to be honest, if it becomes a constraint, you can upgrade the RAM in this machine too. It has a backlit keyboard. It's a decent keyboard. I like Acer keyboards, and it's only $579. I normally don't recommend Walmart, to be honest. If you could find it at the same price elsewhere, I'd say get it, but right now Walmart seems to have it at a decent price. Now, so what if you do need to do something a little bit more computationally intensive, or you're planning on rendering videos? Well, in that case, you want to look for something that has a discrete graphics card separate from the graphics for the, for the CPU. It doesn't mean you can't go for something that also has a decent processor too. Matter of fact, my first choice is there's an Asus Tough Gaming A15 machine. Now, you're talking, this is going to be more expensive. It's going to be about $200 more than the Lenovo Flex 5 we were talking about above. But that's because you're getting a video card that's pretty much current generation. It's an RTX 2060. It's not the fastest video card. You need a desktop machine for that. But this will help a lot on rendering. The other thing is that this actually comes with, there's a way to take the cores in your machine and sometimes make each core act like it's 2 virtual cores, which we call threads. The 4700 and 4500U processors we talked about before don't do that. AMD calls that SMT, simultaneous multi-threading. They don't do SMT, and there's a good reason for not doing it. It makes it cheaper, amongst other things. But this guy does. So you get 8 cores with 16 threads, which means sometimes when you're rendering, for example, it could act like it has 16 processors, which helps speed things up immensely. That's in addition to the several thousand, not quite as powerful, but several thousand processing units that are built into the GPU itself. So this is probably the best choice. Now, I'll be honest, the look isn't going to be to everybody's taste, and yes, you don't have to leave it to that yellow. It has a programmable backlight. You can't highlight individual keys, but I think you can change the colors to the key scheme. It's chunky. The reason it's chunky is to cool off that GPU and to cool off a relatively fast processor, you need chunk. The nice thing about this is that down the road you can add more RAM. You can also add a hard drive in addition to the SSD that comes built into it. This is available at Best Buy for $949 right now. And then finally, my second recommendation, if you don't want to spend quite that much, there's an Acer Nitro 5 for $799.99, also at Best Buy. Now, this is the only machine I'm going to recommend that does not have a Ryzen 4th Gen processor in it. It actually has a 10th Gen Intel i5 10300H. It's one of the best i5 processors that Intel makes, but it only has 4 cores and 8 threads. So you're talking half as much processing power as the Asus TUF. And 4 cores, 8 threads is not even as good as 8 real cores. So it's actually, the CPU is not as powerful as the CPU in our Lenovo Flex 5. But it comes with a NVIDIA GTX, which is last generation video card, 1650 Ti, which again will help a lot with video processing. Now, you might not be able to find, and I will give you links, but you might not be able to find all 4 of these machines in these configurations at these prices. But these are the price points that these things are going for now. I expect, if anything, if you wait until closer to the fall, as we get closer to Black Friday sales and stuff like that, you might be able to get them at a discount, but you're going to be able to find these machines with these types of attributes, if you will, at about this price range. If you don't want a separate video card, the APUs built into the AMD Ryzen, they allow for some light gaming and stuff like that. If you're into that, they also will help with video processing. But the CPUs themselves are so strong that they don't need too much help. I really can't recommend the 4th Gen Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 5 processors enough. If you do need a dedicated video card, because you're doing that type of teaching online, look for something with an RTX 2060 or the NVIDIA GTX 1650 Ti. The RTX 2060 is going to be a little bit more powerful. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. But I think these prices, right, you can find a good, fast, powerful CPU-only machine in the $500 to $750 price range. If you're looking for something that has a discrete GPU, you're looking in the $750 to $1,000 price range, just because normally those machines have other optimizations. But to be honest, you're paying about $200 more at least for the video card. So I know this was a long video. I know it violated my 5 to 10 minutes, and I apologize for that. But hope this has been helpful to you. This at least will let you see what you need to think about when you're considering buying a laptop. Some final closing thoughts. Be careful when you're shopping for a laptop not to get last generation stuff. Or if you do get last generation stuff, know what you're getting into. There's lots of 3rd Gen Ryzen machines out there right now selling for a couple $100 less than these. There's lots of 8th Gen Intel machines selling for a couple $100 less than this. And if you can get a 8th Gen machine or a 3rd Gen Ryzen, and they come with a dedicated video card that's one of these 2 video cards, it's probably worth it. You're not going to be taxing the CPU as hard, because even when you're streaming, to be honest, a good streaming software like Zoom or something is going to leverage that video card as well, right? But be careful. Don't buy something that's too old. Don't buy something that's not going to be powerful enough for what you want it to do. Hope you found this video helpful. If so, please hit the like button and leave some comments. Let me know, would you like for me to go into more detail? I went through a lot of this fast. I was just trying to get to the end and get to the point in terms of what would I recommend right now if I was going to get some laptops to up my game in terms of online teaching. And if you've liked the video, if you liked other videos in the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. Take care.